the impact COVID-19 has had on investors and entrepreneurs. And we're going to talk today about how our panelists are managing through the COVID-19 pandemic. What have they been doing differently to get themselves through the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact the pandemic's had on the industries they do business in, talk about how these companies have adapted their business strategies and sales strategies, and talk about the lessons learned from the pandemic and what these companies would do differently if a second wave were to hit. So with that, I'd like to introduce our three panelists today. We are joined by Dave Werzer, the Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer of Connecticut Innovations. We are also joined by Mike Nicastro, the Chief Executive Officer of Continuity, and by Mike Zani, the Chief Executive Officer of the Predictive Index. So Dave, I'd like to start with you. Dave, tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about Connecticut Innovations.
Thanks, Craig, and appreciate you having us this morning. Connecticut Innovations, as many of you know, is the state of Connecticut's venture arm. We actually are a venture capital firm. We co-invest with other venture capital firms. We've been around more than 23 years now doing venture investing. We have 180 portfolio companies primarily focused on technology and healthcare and bioscience. We are an early stage investor, and that means that we oftentimes lead the first investments in many of our portfolio companies and pull together syndicates, often at the early stages, angel networks, high net worth individuals, family offices, and strategic investors. And we are really focused primarily on driving job growth, leveraging capital into the state of Connecticut, and focusing on venture returns so that we can have returns to reinvest and continue to invest in new startups and new opportunities on the early stage of technology in Connecticut, supporting innovative economy for Connecticut and strong Connecticut presence and Connecticut growth. And all of our companies have some strong Connecticut presence and make certain requirements relative to that.
Thanks, Dave. And Mike Nicastro, tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about Continuity.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Craig. So I'm a Connecticut native and cut my teeth in business here, but in the last 43 years, I've been involved with predominantly bank tech in some way, shape, or form. Started my early part of my career with the NCR Corporation, and then was one of a group of folks who launched a company here called Open Solutions, which Dave knows, and was an early CI portfolio company, which did extremely well and ended up now part of Fiserv. And over the years, I've been involved with a number of boards of CI companies, and Continuity was one of them, and jumped into the CEO seat in 2016 to create some growth and scale the business. And so we're happy to be here and always playing a part in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Connecticut.
Well, glad to have you, Mike. And Mike Zani, tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about the Predictive Index.
Great. Hello. I'm speaking to you from Rhode Island. I hope that's okay with the Connecticut crowd. At least we can revel in that our two states are doing pretty well in this pandemic at the moment. So my business partner and I used a search fund investment model to buy used companies with other people's money. So the Predictive Index is our fourth platform. We were clients for 10 years. It was a 66-year-old firm when we bought it from the estate of the founders. We had been trying to buy it for 5 years. The Predictive Index is a talent optimization company. We help CEOs and companies formulate talent strategies to support their overall strategy. At its core, you may have heard of its behavioral or cognitive assessments. You may have even taken one in a pre-hire or post-hire setting. So oftentimes I'll come from the perspective of either making investments and taking over companies, or from the perspective of talent, since that is now the business I'm in. It's really great to be here. Thank you.
So Mike Zani, let's start with you. How have you adapted your management style during the pandemic, and how have you managed employees working remotely right now?
It's an interesting question. I think all of us are going to be iterating and evolving really quickly on this. One thing that I'll point out to our audience, investing in a home studio, if you notice my image, I will switch from the high def camera to my laptop camera, and you can see the difference between those two. It's like with a small investment, creating a studio so that we're going to be doing a lot of transmission. We can't be there face to face. You want to look tight. You want to look professional. You'll notice you get a lavalier mic. You sit in a room with good lighting. You clear up your background. What we've done is we've created, an all company forum weekly on Fridays where we let people submit anonymous questions or regular questions, town hall meeting with the senior team. We're making sure that we bring humor into it. We've adopted polling software so that we can take quick polls with people, even if we're doing goofy stuff to really serious stuff. Like when we did a reduction in force and we had to do a reduction of force remotely, which is difficult to do because the people who are loose in the socket, you can't find them as easily and make sure they're okay. So obviously, really optimizing your transmission mode. We've done a couple other things, creating some no meeting blocks, especially for parents with young kids. When kids were in school, these no meeting blocks, we were really holding as sacrosanct. We were doing a half an hour early in the day, lunchtime, half hour later in the day, nothing earlier than 8:30, nothing after 5:30, to really preserve family time. Because what you're seeing, and you've probably felt it, was just this meeting creep where you're going back to back on Zooms and they were exhausting you. We're also being prescriptive, making sure people are taking their time off, making sure to turn off their video if it's not important, because video causes a lot more cognitive load. And we're telling people, if it's a one-on-one, go for a walking meeting. It's a nice day, put your earbuds in and go for a walk with the person you're having a one-on-one with. And cover the first 10 minutes if you got some Zoom stuff, screen sharing, but then go for a walk. You're going to feel better and you're going to like it better. So there are things that we can do that are low cost, really creative. We're just learning them, but just to make sure that we as leaders are being human with our people, because, there's a great quote that says, we're not working from home. We're at home trying to work, and we've got to deal with that.
Yeah, Mike, that's some great feedback there. And Mike Nicastro, I'd like to ask you the same question. What are you doing to manage through the pandemic, and what's your company doing to manage employees working remotely right now?
Yeah, I'll play a little off of what Mike just said. Communication becomes critical here, and we were predominantly a virtual company anyway. We're headquartered is in New Haven, and most of the employment staff is here in Connecticut. But because of locations, because of the way they work, because of the nature of the business, we were a virtual model predominantly. That said, you have to be careful because you can lose culture quickly. And I think what we've had to make sure we do is reinforce culture and keep the communications lines open and make sure people get out and put the whole thing down. My CFO and I were laughing the other day. We were saying, because he and I are predominantly in and out of New Haven, and we haven't been since March. And we were laughing that the day actually starts earlier and ends later now because the commute is 35 seconds to the room, and so that hour from Bristol to New Haven for me, which was somewhat therapeutic, is no longer available, and so we have to be careful of that, and we are doing a little bit more in the realm of stand-ups. For the executive team, for the mid-level managers, for folks to make sure that they are communicating on a regular basis, and not just let's talk about problems, right? Let's talk about successes. Let's talk about things that are going well. I think it's important to share that, and we have been on a monthly basis trying to do an all-employee kind of all hands here's where we are, that has been effective thus far.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. Yeah, and I agree. I think communication is so important, especially when we're not all in the same physical location right now. Dave, I'd like to ask you the same question. What is Connecticut Innovations doing to manage right now through the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure, Craig. So first of all, a lot of the things that both Mikes have already talked about, of course, and we were not a virtual company in any way before Friday the 13th of March. And what a Friday the 13th it turned out to be. So we had everybody immediately transition to home, and frankly, over communication was one of our hallmarks. We had solid productivity and really very effective work ethic. I did miss the commute, to Mike's point. It was quite therapeutic for me, and you really do need to take those breaks. One of our challenges has been sourcing deals. Much of our sourcing comes from interaction out at events, some planned and some happenstance. And so it's been a bit more challenging to find structured ways to get involved with startups, entrepreneurs, and I think a lot more people are on a lot more podcasts, events, virtual panels such as this one, etc. We have reopened our office starting last week. We anticipate never having more than 50% of our employees in, and we set up a schedule. People were welcome to come in. The first day we had 8. By the 4th day we had 2. And we found that most people are very comfortable continuing to telecommute. But we have no visitors at present, masks, social distancing, many cleaning precautions. And we believe that increased telecommuting will probably last for quite a long time, or maybe forever for a certain number of our CI employees. But it is important for us to be open over time here and to be able to interact with portfolio companies, potential prospects for our investment, and interact in the community and the entrepreneurial and innovative ecosystem.
Yeah, Dave, I want to touch on that last point you mentioned about continuing to telecommute after the pandemic, and maybe Mike McCaster, maybe you and Mike Zani can touch this question a little bit further. How do you think productivity and collaboration in your organization has been impacted during the pandemic? What are you trying to do to make sure productivity and that collaboration is still going at that pre-pandemic level? So Mike DeCastro, do you want to start that question?
Yeah, sure. Look, to some extent, productivity is way up. I think the thing that we've had to measure is here's the challenge of having already been significantly virtual. Is those folks had, while they worked their day virtual, they could go places, they could go to concerts, they could go and have a life, right? And now, not only were they virtual, but they were locked in virtual. So, some of that has to make sure that productivity stays up. It's to make sure that everybody's staying mentally healthy. And I think that's an important piece of this. And so managers, the team, even my executive team, I've said, guys, make sure you're getting time off. You've got to put this thing down. And we've been doing that, I think, successfully. But the sidebar from that is, as I've seen actual improved productivity in some ways. We certainly are more communicative than we ever were, and we're taking advantage of other tools like Slack and the way to reach each other quickly if we need to. So I see the upside with that. We'll probably stay this way quite a bit for a while, but we're always going to have to measure it, and I think that's the important piece.
Yeah, and Mike Zani, do you want to talk about productivity and collaboration at the Predictive Index right now?
Yeah, we've done something that you may have seen or heard about in schools, the flipped classroom. So we're no longer presenting in meetings. What we do is we use tools like Soapbox, which enable you to do screen share and video capture from your laptop. and everyone is presenting, and you can listen to those presentations asymmetrically. So when we're actually getting together, we're working the issue. And that, the fully flipped classroom where you do all the work ahead of time, and you do catch people, like we asked at the beginning, who hasn't read who didn't get a chance to watch the soapbox meeting. But there are other tools like Miro and Figma, where you can actually have multiple people working on the same canvas online together, like a whiteboard, that have been, and I'm not saying that those are the tools that necessarily do it, but investing the time for your organization to anchor on collaboration tools where people can be in the same canvas actually working. And like I said, we are just getting started on this as you know, all of us in industry. There's going to be a huge amount of development in the next 5-6 months as these companies even take our feedback with their product-led growth to figure out how are we going to work in this way. But to Nicastro's point, I think there are aspects of our business that are far more productive. It's the human side I'm worried about, making sure that, the PTSD, I mean, we're letting people who have raised their hand and say, listen, if you are at an unproductive place at home, you have too many roommates, maybe you're not getting on with your spouse, maybe you live with your in-laws in an overly crowded space and your kids drive you crazy. No questions asked, you can come back to the office first. And because not everyone has, the space to really do this the right way. So we're gonna have to work through those people issues, almost one at a time.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe this is a mixed answer, but I want to get all of your takes on, do you think working remotely will be a permanent thing moving forward, or is this really a case-by-case basis? So Mike Zani, could you answer that question first?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we've gone 3 to 5 years into the future and on evolution. So we'll come back to physical offices, but it is going to be, we used to work 1 day a week from work, which is typically a Friday. We're going to see people working the majority, away. And this broke some of our managers were really sticklers, like our dev team. They wanted engineers in place to collaborate. And now that we've broken that, dam, we hire developers in Kansas City, in Omaha, in Oklahoma, and we can actually get better developers for the dollar. Then this is a huge newfound opportunity for companies in Boston and New York and San Francisco, where you just can't get tech talent, or you're just paying amazing amounts for it. So I think we're not going fully back.
Mike Nicastro, what's your take on working permanently from home?
Yeah, I have to agree with Mike. I think that's the direction. I think, we can have, there's a corollary conversation from that, right, as to the net effect of that on the economy and sectors of the economy. And, that's what we do at Continuity. We manage risk and compliance for banks. And so we've got, because of this scenario, we've got a 12 to 18 month concern that we're going to have to monitor for them, especially those who are laden with lots of commercial property paper. So those are things we got to think about. So this pandemic is going to have tentacles in many, many ways. It's going to have created interesting, great things like this ability to work remote and do these kinds of things. And then there will be side effects and aftermath to deal with. But I don't see us spending much time in New Haven.
Yeah, so Mike, I think you made an interesting point about seeing the impact of this, and maybe we still haven't seen some of the impacts of the pandemic yet, and I'm sure that's going to be the case in the venture capital industry. So Dave, what's your thought about working remotely for venture capitalists and the impact that's having now on venture capital, and then what are some of the things that are going to happen in the venture capital industry because of this pandemic?
Sure. So first of all, working remotely, we're a statewide organization. We had already, in the middle of this, decided we were moving and splitting our office into Hartford, New Haven, and Stamford, and we've been doing so. However, the increase in remote and working at home is definitely going to help us better cover the state of Connecticut, to be honest with you. Oftentimes we had people going into our office in Rocky Hill and then spending an hour and 20 minutes on a good day to get to Stamford or Greenwich, okay, and then back. A lot of time that could better be spent if we were a little more regionally focused as to where people live and working remotely. But more broadly, the changes in the venture capital industry, for us, have really been number one. Our portfolio companies, starting in March and April and May, accelerated closes, safeguarded capital, extended their runways as much as possible, and really the focus of the venture capital industry has been focused on your existing portfolio companies first and foremost, and therefore, finding lead investors for new deals has been challenging to date, and continues to be challenging for new rounds. Also, I think our co-investors at early stages, angels and high net worth individuals, are safeguarding cash a bit as well. So there's a bit of an additional challenge for us on the early stage side. But as I mentioned before, deal sourcing and frankly doing due diligence, but doing it not in person is a change and a bit challenging for us as well. It's fine to have virtual presentations, but not sitting down with people before you make a $1 million+ investment is a change for us and for the venture capital industry. And not as many, as I mentioned before, chance meetups make it more difficult to form investor partnerships as well. So it's really been a bit of a change that I think is still evolving. It's accelerating, to Mike Rennie's point, but it's a lot of these changes are accelerating at the present time. But I think the venture capital industry is going through some change and settling in now on how to manage not only their existing portfolio, but look at new investments and take risks and manage due diligence. It's kind of challenging. Mike, is he muted?
Mike, I think your mic is muted.
Uh-oh.
So Dave, what recommendation would you give to entrepreneurs right now that are looking to potentially raise some capital in the next, say, 2 to 3 months? What should they be doing right now? What should they really be focused on?
Yeah, companies fundraising for startups especially can be difficult right now at the early stages. And number one, I'm telling people, cultivate old leads. Go back to those that you've been to before. The world has changed. You are changing. There's a number of companies pivoting. Go to those investors, those investor contacts, those strategic investors that might be potential customers that could also invest, et cetera. That's number one. Number two, adjust your pitch decks. I know that everybody's been used to somewhat having virtual pitches, but adjust it for the COVID environment. We've got companies that are putting together videos rather than as the intro or as part of the pitch deck versus just trying to pitch virtually. In other words, come up with other ways to replace the in-person approach and over-communicate and follow up. And frankly, directly deal with, number three, we're telling people the COVID impact. Be clear about the impact on the plan. Be clear about the impact on financial projections. Don't back away from it, but instead talk about the opportunities and, take sort of the bull by the horns, leading the investors to the diligence questions that they're going to come up with anyway, and come right at them with the impact of the world as it's rapidly changing and how you're dealing with it and what opportunity it presents for your company.
Craig, I think I'm back.
All right, Mike. You were raising your hand.
I was raising my hand, so much for the lapel mic, which battery must have run out, but I've hopefully got a good backup. The idea is we were raising doing some sub debt, and we were doing it before, in January, February. But it was interesting. In one of our sub debt pitches, the 4 partners were on the call, and they actually said, "This is the first time all 4 partners have been on the call at the same time for the first meeting." And each partner approaches that investment with a different sort of, attitude. One might be risk tolerant, one might be risk intolerant. But they appreciated, they very much appreciated they were all on that call. Now we're about to close that deal, and they're flying up to Boston in order to meet us. And it's sort of like we would have been the first investment they did without ever meeting someone. And they're like, we just can't get our arms around that. And that's a mistake. They're from Texas. They should not fly to Boston, to meet us. We've already taken 50 million of growth capital from General Catalyst. You're like, we probably don't have 2 heads. They could do whatever due diligence they need, but they need to do that. They need to break that model the first time, which will make it easier, and say, we can do investments without seeing people face to face. It's just this bias people can't, get comfortable with.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about, so we just talked about some of the trends going on in the venture capital industry. Mike Nicastro, you service a lot of financial service industries and banks and credit unions and mortgage companies. So what's going on in that industry right now? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, I think they're being cautious right now. I think part of, we've managed this in lots of different ways. First and foremost, from experience, right? If you've been in this as long as I have, you remember a lot of events that have happened to the banking industry over the years. The S&L crash in '89 and '90, the post 9/11, there was a bubble of the internet in 2000, which affected the banks. There was, post 9/11, and then of course 2007, 2008, and in each time some contagion got into the banks and caused the problem. And I think they're watching for that right now. They're worried about that right now. And let me think about it. 2 things are happening to them that I think will have a long-term impact on venture, on private equity, on the funding markets. And first off, interest rates are almost zero, right? They're almost negative. And, if interest rates are that low, banks don't make money. It's just that simple. No earnings, no capital, no loans. And that's a challenge. Second, as we've had this discussion, you hear most of us talking about being in some form of remote nature for an extended period of time. That's at least certainly until there's a valid vaccine or a valid therapeutic that makes it far less risky for people to be combined together. And so if you extend that out, and I think about other industries like entertainment. I mean, live theater, Broadway just announced they're not coming back till January. That's probably going to be March or April. So all those things, extrapolate that out, that's going to have impact on those industries. That means debt in those industries is either not going to get serviced, or it's going to become non-performing assets on those financial institutions' balance sheets. And that's going to be a little bit of a side effect of that. So that's a focus for us right now. We're trying to work on some tools in our tool set that can help them. It's not going to stop it from happening, right? We can't prevent it, but we can be more of a canary in the coal mine for them, and help them start to look for the leading indicators that will let them react more quickly. But I would expect, and not to be a downer here, but I would expect we'll see some additional consolidation in the banking industry, in 12 to 18 months. And it's hard for smaller banks to get by with low capital. And when you're not making big earnings, that just makes it tricky. And that has that ripple effect through everything.
So Mike, when you see this happening, and maybe some of your customers consolidating, what are you doing? How are you adapting your business model to service these customers? How are you adapting on the fly as you see these trends happening?
So we actually kind of jumped in. You know, one of the modules we offer, or two of the modules we offer, are curated content. And so we are constantly curating information coming out of the Fed and the states at a regulatory level. And while we have 300 institutions nationwide who pay us for this, you know, there's 5,000-6,000 more. And so in this pandemic, we said, look, we're going to go out and we're going to turn these curated modules on for anybody. You don't even have to be a paying client. Just call us. We can onboard you in about an hour. And this will save you hours of time. Think about it. Before the pandemic, the federal, the members of the FFIEC were issuing alerts 3 or 4 a week. That was all members put together. After the pandemic started, it was 8, 9, 10 a day. And so you try keeping up with that. And then to be told you have to go work from home in an industry that's never worked from home, banking. So we've made it easy for them to have access. We've curated the content. We've turned it on for free. We had 180 new financial institutions join us in 2 weeks. So, you know, for us, it's a method of growth, but it's also a contribution to the industry to say, look, it's not going to do us any good if you all go, if you all fail. So let us help you, and then we can worry about a paid relationship later. And I think those are the kinds of tools that we're looking for, the things that the people, the brains in our regulatory operations center are trying to develop and deploy as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You've really adapted your organization to really service your customers in the time of need. And I think that's a great example of how Continuity is doing that currently. Mike Zania, I want to talk about the predictive index, talk about you service so many different industries. You're seeing so much happening with your customers. What's going on right now in the industries that you serve, some of the trends that you're finding right now?
Yeah, we serve about 8,000 plus clients, and we don't do all of that direct. We have a network of 500 certified partners who do that. But we get to look at the aggregate data, and clearly things like hospitality and travel just annihilated. When we look at the retention rates, if they were renewing, they just said no. But interesting, food service is just all back on because they laid everyone off and now they're bringing them back on. Someone posts a job, they're getting 1,000 applications, and a human can't deal with 1,000 applications. They still want talent, but they can't manage through that talent themselves. They want to need some system to filter down and reduce to the 5 or 10 finalists. And I actually think this is going to be the silver lining for a lot of people. We were in a 5-year war on talent where you couldn't fill positions, you were dying to get people, your pipeline was sort of barren, and you were often taking people who were sort of emergent candidates, didn't have the experience. Now with 10% of people on the street, and most through no fault of their own, there's great talent on the street. If you want to refresh your coffers, if you want to retool your organization, this is an amazing time to do this. And there are obviously some industries. Construction went on a brief pause, but is still hammering away, literally and figuratively. And they were dying for talent. I just gave a talk at a construction symposium remotely, and they're using this as an opportunity to just rebuild their management ranks. So there are a lot of industries that are growing. That non-urgent healthcare is absolutely preparing because of the pent-up demand that's going to happen. And the assisted living workspace, they're trying to re-envision themselves because people are still getting older and people still can't take care of their older loved ones. But that whole industry is going through this massive change, and they are very, very active. But if you look at the financial sectors, they will tell you what industries are hot or not. With fuel prices at where they are, the whole industry sector and the travel sector and hospitality and anything to do with travel is just crushed.
So an organization that's looking to hire and refresh that talent right now, I'm sure it's a challenge to physically meet that person for an in-person interview. Um, what does the predictive index do to kind of help make an employer comfortable with hiring that employee? How can you talk a little bit more about making an employer comfortable with hiring and finding the right talent right now?
Well, it will be hard to get someone totally comfortable with it. You know, I'm not going to make this an infomercial, but the number one and number two predictors of workplace performance are behavioral fit, you know, and cognitive appropriateness for the position. So, I mean, you can do those things remotely, but let's put predictive index aside. Employers are going to need to get crafty. You know, you can send someone, you can be on a Zoom and send them, take a nasty email out of your service desk, hand it to someone and say, look at this nastygram that I just got. Please respond to this nastygram in the next 20 minutes. You send it to them, they type it up in 20 minutes, you look at what they responded to. And you could be like, no cost way to do this via Zoom, you know, go write me a response to this letter. Be crafty and clever with the requirements of that role and testing the metal of what people can do, and make it time box, just like business is. And you're going to be able to get comfortable saying, you know, I'm going to take a bet on this person. I really liked the way they responded to that. I liked their swagger. I liked how they dealt with me. And we're going to get better at doing this remotely. Just like the sub-debt lenders, you don't have to see the founders of the company to loan the money. You don't have to see an employee before you hire them.
So Dave, I want to ask you this question about, you know, you talked a little bit about this earlier about investing in a company where you haven't met the founder yet. Has Kinetic Innovations done that yet? During the last 3 months, have we wrote a check to anyone that we've never met face to face yet?
Craig, we're about to. So we've got our first one where we've done all the diligence and start to finish, and actually goes to our investment committee next week, and then we're going to make that investment. It is a different style and a different approach, but it's very doable. I don't think that by itself is the challenge. But what Mike Vander was just talking about a little bit on being creative, I think we need to be creative both in terms of how we meet people, but also how they're hiring. I'm seeing creative pay practices being talked about. You know, we're hearing about concessions as we head into a very aggressive recession, and 10 to 20% of the workforce is looking for a job. We're seeing more consultant versus employee kinds of relationships that are being established. You know, so I think we're seeing a fair amount of transformation. Some of those consultant versus employee trends were already there. And I saw a quote the other day that said, the trends that we're experiencing were already upon us, but the acceleration of those trends has been unleashed by the virus. And I think the acceleration of many trends has been unleashed by the virus. Trends that are driven by demographics, trends that are driven by various industries. So we're seeing a lot of trends, and I just want to hit an additional trend that I'm seeing, and maybe this is kind of transition to what happens in the second wave, but we're starting to see a trend on M&A, on mergers and acquisitions, an aggressive trend, potential takeovers of weaker companies, lots of activities where multiples have held up to date, believe it or not. Revenue multiples, and they may contract with recession going forward, but we're seeing, frankly, people are willing to pay up for growth right now. and I think we're going to see some more of that. So back, you know, just trends in general as it relates not only to hiring, not only to us investing, but just these trends, all of them are accelerating at a pace that we're not used to. And for us as investors, trying to figure out which of those trends are going to win is some of our greatest challenge right now, and getting to know the people that we believe can most effectively manage change. And that's our number one criteria when we're looking at investment in teams or in CEOs, in startups, is the only thing we're sure of is whatever they tell us in the business plan is not how it's going to go. So we absolutely want people who we have confidence can manage change, and in this environment, manage change that it is accelerating at a more rapid pace than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, Dave, that's an interesting take on the M&A market happening right now. It's also interesting to see the number of IPOs in bio companies right now. That is one sector that has benefited pretty significantly since the pandemic has started. We got about 15 to 18 minutes left here, so I want to just touch upon one final point, and Mike Zani, maybe you can start this one. But what are some of the key takeaways you've experienced from the pandemic, and what would the predictive index do differently if a second wave were to hit?
Well, we are planning on the second wave. I don't think there's anything that's going to stop this. We haven't seen any data. I think when we get inside, because it's going to start getting colder here in the Northeast, we're gonna see more of that. I think you would be foolish to not plan on that. I think our population is going to be much more amenable to whatever actions we have to take. We've gotten them very used to change. We said, listen, the one thing we can promise you is change going forward. We need to be flexible. We need to plan on this. We've certainly lowered all of our budgets and cut every spend that we could. This thing caught us at a very aggressive stance. We were burning $1 million a month. And, you come into that, and we lost 30% of our top line because it was all in-person training. We've reduced 25% of the workforce. We pushed off every discretionary spend that we possibly could just to preserve that right. And this was a company, when we bought it, it was 45% EBITDA margins. So the company can be profitable. It's just like you just built this growth engine. The last thing you want to do is disassemble it. So we had to pull it back as carefully as we could. To do it again, the one spend, we had an in-person event called Optima that probably cost us $1.5 million. We had Jim Collins and Guy Raz as headliners. It was in October. We canceled that event immediately in March. And I wish what we did is we held it just virtually. Become world. We still have the headliners. Let's be world class at a virtual event. And I think that was a mistake that we made. But we were scared like everyone else. Where's this thing going? I think if there's a double dip, maybe not quite be as reactionary on that. I want to see it play out a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Mike Nicastro, what are some of your key takeaways from the pandemic, and what would you do differently if a second wave were to hit?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Mike. There's not an if, it's simply when. And I wouldn't, to some extent, with this kind of regionalization of the virus, I don't know that it's ever going to be a second wave. It's just going to be a continuation of the first wave that just rolls up and rolls down, right? And I think we're going to just see that until there's a vaccine, until there's a therapeutic or both. This is the nature of the beast. And claims to the contrary are just foolish, right? So I think the lessons learned in this are make sure you can scale up and scale down. You heard Mike. I can tell you is, we have some debt on the books from Excel KKR. We work very closely with them, and I know that some of their portfolio companies in the travel industry were in the same boat as Mike. They were high-fiving in February and getting ready for a big 2020, and then by the third week of March, they had let a major portion of their team go and had to hunker down because they were going into capital conservation mode. And I think those are things you have to watch for. So the lessons are watch your liquidity. And make sure that you can sustain. Ultimately, in this, what you want to do is live to fight another day. And so, learn from those lessons and take advantage of that. On the other side of the coin, as we've heard, there are companies and there are industries who are turning and burning right now. And so, and I think there's opportunity for everybody in that, right? It's there's always a way to find opportunities. You have to be careful, right? That watching your capital, watching your liquidity is a balancing test. It is constantly trying to manage those two things, because if you go too far, you're not going to have the resources to execute the opportunity. But if you don't pull back on the throttle when things are in trouble, you won't be around to execute on the opportunity. And I think those are some key lessons learned. I think for us, you know, when this kind of took off, when we were actually able to make some hay out of it, I probably would have grabbed some additional salespeople sooner. But again, being careful. I think this concept of, I think Dave and Mike both mentioned the idea of not employees, but contractors, right? You got to look in terms of those kinds of things, because there is a lot of talent on the street, but you can't scale up fast and you can't scale down fast with employees. With contractors, you can scale quickly. And I think that's going to be part of the playbook for the next 12 to 18 months. And I think smart companies will do that, and there'll be opportunities, and then there will be times when there are no opportunities. But, you know, I think we look forward to it. Our goal now is to stay on board and try to find those, I think I called it earlier, the canary in the coal mine, to help the banks deal with the aftermath.
Yep. And Mike, I think there's some great points you mentioned there, and find that delicate balance between the opportunity, but also conserving enough capital. So Dave, I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, on what are some of your takeaways, and what would you do differently if a second wave were to hit?
Well, I don't think we do that much different, but I would say that conserving capital for the startups is just going to be more important than ever to extend runway. One of the things we've all talked about is how things are changing digitally, and we're doing everything digitally. Well, one of the things we're going to coach people more on is using digital technology to try to drive change in their core business model, and try to think even more creative about their core business model, and how they have done things in the past and how they might do things differently in the future. Certainly some of that's cost savings, some of that's efficiencies, but really try to think outside the box. And the other thing we're really going to do more of, I think, with the second wave, as we ride the second wave, is focus on what the competition is doing, even more so what customers are doing, what frankly is changing for our employees. We talked a lot about our employees early on here, and giving them a break, making sure that they're taking time, making sure that they evolve to very effective and efficient work practices, but also manage every other pressure from family on down. So, you know, we're gonna spend a great deal of time on the second wave, coaching our companies on the best way to handle and think about the dramatic changes that are taking place. And the last thing I wanted to mention is we talked about biotech before, and half of our portfolio was biotech and healthcare. And you know, there's a lot of companies pivoting to say they can help with COVID-19. We can get a better test at home, diagnostic. We can help with symptoms, respiratory ailments, et cetera. We're working aggressively to pivot our drugs so that it can be an answer to certain virus components. You know, all these things. Our feeling is, in the second wave, a lot of those that are pivoting right now are going to go by the wayside. There's going to be a few winners, like always in bioscience and healthcare development, and a number who are not going to be winners. So we're going to be coaching people to be very cognizant of the competition, and if they believe they truly have an edge, get enough capital together. If they don't have enough capital together to do so and make that pivot, stay with your core business and evolve your core business in ways that can drive change effectively in the second wave in the new environment.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about making sure you're making the right pivot and not just chasing what the market's doing right now. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So we have about 5 to 10 minutes left here. So I do want to take some time to address some audience questions. So if anyone has some last minute questions, please submit them in the Q&A box below or the chat box below. We'll be happy to answer those questions. One question we did have, and I think Mike, he gave a good example of this, but maybe this is for Dave and Mike Nicastro. Was there anything that you tried so far during the pandemic that didn't work, or think just something that might just did not work effectively remotely?
That's hard to say, because being on a higher level of remoteness to begin with, that didn't really impact us all that much. Nothing that really kind of sticks out that blew up in our face at this point. So, but I'm sure there will be. It's the nature of the beast.
I'd say our number one thing was trying to open a new office in the middle of a pandemic. Frankly, the office is beautiful, but no one can come see us. And frankly, people have become very used to working remotely. So I'd say the number one thing was we wanted it done, and we want to be able to meet with people. But in the current environment, meeting even if somebody comes by New Haven to meet with us, we're taking a walk outside. So it's been a bit more challenging than we thought it was going to be.
So another question we have, and maybe Mike Zani, you can take this one, but can you talk a little bit about just building a culture remotely right now? We do have some companies that belong to this CTMNT Enterprise Forum that are very early stage, or they probably won't open an office in the foreseeable future, maybe till they get to a post-Series A round. Could you just talk a little bit about strategies for building a culture remotely?
Yeah, I mean, the same tenets for building a culture, it really has to be about, intentionality. I think companies that are very intentional about their culture, and this can't just mean about supporting positive cultural things, but also putting a hard check on negative cultural things. Just last week we had to fire 2 employees for a breach of what is our culture. That the acronym is THREADS. I won't get into that, but and this was, we never fire someone out of to surprise them, except if it's a culture violation. So I think you need this, the same intentionality, the positive reinforcement, and unfortunately occasionally this negative response. I think you have to bring fun back into things too. That, Mike Nicastro is saying doing a lot more stand-ups. We're doing that as well. We're making sure that you take some time in your stand-ups to do some fun things, and they can be very ad hoc. Someone said, pull up the last picture on your phone and explain it. I wouldn't have thought of that. I'm not that type of creative, but it was really an enjoyable 5 minutes when in that stand-up people are kind of sharing like that. So maybe fun is part of our culture. It might not be part of every company's culture, but you take a piece of time and invest in your people so that they can share. Because foundationally, work is probably 50% of our foundation. If you have a career and you're a career person, we need to make sure that we're part of the solution as companies to support people for this, what is going to be a long slog.
Yeah, that's some great feedback. I think we have time for maybe 1-2 more questions. One question that did come through is, right now in the venture capital industry, there's only about 3% of companies that are women-led companies. So Dave, maybe you could take this question. What's your opinion on women-led companies, and what can we do to just support more women-led organizations?
Sure. So we're seeing substantial effort to invest further in women-led businesses, women-led companies. female CEOs or significant numbers of females in the senior management team. One of the things CI has done is we've become a limited partner in a venture firm called 1843 that is specifically investing in only in female-led startups. We also work closely with a firm called Golden Seeds, and Golden Seeds is very involved in female-led startups as well, and has been a co-investor with CI. I would like to give you an exact percentage as to the number of female-led businesses in CI's 180 companies. I would tell you that it's probably less than 10% now, but is accelerating, and we're continuing to see on management teams that we're investing in going forward, we're continuing to see, if not all, a number of CEOs on the female side. We are seeing a number of management teams with more than one female in the management team. And I think we're going to continue to see that trend. As we know, over 50% of college graduates, 52% and growing are female at the present time. You're seeing the impact on the development of workforces, and I think you're going to continue to see more and more capital going towards female-led business.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It's great to hear the steps that Connecticut Innovations is taking to support women-led companies. I think we maybe have time for one last quick question. And the question was to comment on modular workers and in the commitment to a risky venture. I don't know who would want to take that question, but please feel free for anyone to jump in and take that question.
What are we saying is a modular worker?
I didn't quite get this question either. I think it was, you could grab someone part-time, half-time, maybe it's a temp to perm position, maybe structure the relationship as an independent contractor and give them more freedom until you can have the commitment to bring them on board permanently. I certainly think, to Mike Nicastro's point earlier, you need flexibility. I think if that was the question on creating some modularity around talent, temp worker, maybe someone who can work hourly for a period of time, someone who can work as a true independent contractor with more freedom, and then test them out, bring them on board as you can. I think that's a great way to, in this riskier environment, to wade into something more permanent.
That's great. So we're pretty much right at 12 o'clock. So I'd like to take this time to thank our three panelists for talking about the COVID-19 pandemic today. Please feel free to check out their websites, their LinkedIn pages. All these organizations offer a ton of resources for companies that are looking to hire employees, to find sources of capital, to dealing with ongoing regulations. So please check out all of their LinkedIn pages and company websites, because there's a lot of great resources that these companies can offer. I just want to mention, the MIT Enterprise Forum is going to have a future event, probably the week of July 20th. We are just working to confirm the final date. We're going to talk about some disruption going on in the music industry, and a lot of that's happening right here in Connecticut. We have a few companies in the state of Connecticut that are working to seriously disrupt the music industry. So I think that'll be a really interesting presentation in a couple weeks. So we would love to have some attendees today come back and join us for that in a couple weeks. We are going to be sending out a survey at the end of this webinar. We'd love some feedback. This was our first ever virtual event that the MIT Enterprise Forum held. So we want to get better and offer some more relevant content. So please help us with some feedback, and we'll work to get better and offer some better content. So with that, I want to thank all of our attendees for listening this past hour. Thank you again to our panelists, and I'd like to wish everyone a good rest of the week and happy holiday coming up. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks, Craig. Nice job.
Nice done.